All right, good morning. We are live. We've got everything kind of already set up, and we are just crushing it right now. Just making sure everything is good and going. We're going to start building. I still got a lot of this to go through. It is what it is. We're going to get cracking here in just a second. I need to flip my camera light on, I think. There we go. And that's all good. That's all good. I think that's it. Cool. So, one of the things I wanted to make sure I talked about today. Why aren't you working? Yep. All right. That's not true. Why are you lying to me? It's lying to me. Don't let it lie to me. Like I said, one of the things I want to talk about is Space Marines. A lot of people poo-pooing Space Marines. I've had some interesting discussions because of my stats video that I put up on YouTube. Got a lot of really good feedback from it, and I think I've kind of touched on it before and what it is and what it's about, and even how it came to be, like why I decided to make that video. So I'm not going to dive too deep into any of that again, but the one thing I did want to make sure I talked about was Space Marines. You know, a lot of people are like, poo poo, they're bad, poo poo, they're bad. Uh, and I'm not buying it. You know, um, they're not good. Like, I see them as a very average army right now. I definitely don't see them as bad. Um, and really, I think it boils down to the fact that just you gotta think outside the box with it. You've got to be willing to do some different ideas, do some different concepts. Rather than playing the meta with them, I think you're going to be better off trying to play counter meta with them. Oh, we need to. So it's just a thing to think about. If you go into it and you're just playing what everybody else is playing, you're probably going to get the results that everybody else is getting. But I think if you're willing to kind of come up with something that's a little bit different, and that kind of works contrary to what people expect out of it, you're going to do better. Like I think White Scars have a lot of playability. There's some good stuff there, and I know they're not everybody's favorite, and that's fine. I'm not a big Marine fan or player myself, so I'm not coming at this from the I love Marines angle, but more from the I will occasionally look at Marines and just kind of see what they do. So I've got a little bit different perspective, and I think like I said, like White Scars, I think their secondary is very good. They get, I think it's 3 points for killing. It's very similar to the Drukari one. They get 3 points for killing, I think it's a vehicle character or monster in melee, and they get 1 point for killing any other unit, and it's units, not models. But they get 1 point for killing any other unit in melee. So it's one of those where there's some scoreability there. Like, you've got to get your units there. You've got to use good positioning, but there's definitely ways to get some points and to like, I think that's a very solid secondary. The There's one Marine secondary that they just fixed in the I say fixed, that's not the right word. They just changed in the data slate, and it was, oh gosh, what was it? You score 4 points, I believe, if you take an objective from your opponent. So that one's weird because that requires a lot of forethought. You can't just hop on objectives and be like, these are mine now. You actually have to kind of like do a little bit of give and take with your opponent. You have to, it really requires a lot because it's like the OG, like when Chaos first got their secondary before their book came out. It's very similar to how that interacted, you know. So it's one of those where, that one was good. I've taken it. It was good, but I had to really think about what I was doing, because if I instantly jumped on an objective, it meant that I probably wasn't going to be able to score that secondary very well. So sometimes I had to give you points in order for me to get points. So it was kind of a weird interaction, but it wasn't a bad one. Anything that kind of makes you stop and think and still is viable and lets you score points, I think is good. So, oaths, I think, is a very situational one. I know it kind of got, like, I guess, toned down, nerfed. I don't know, because you can only score 3 on it, if I remember correctly now, instead of 4. But there are definitely still missions where I feel like that's an auto take. And I still think Marines do well if they try to hold the center of the board. But I haven't played with a Marine army in a long time. I have actually put Space Marines on the table, contrary to, like, what I say and what other people think about me. I do tend to prefer the way most Xenos armies handle, and really the way, like, 8th Ed Chaos handled, because they kind of played like a Xenos army in 9th edition, so it was kind of neat. Like once they got their codex, they just kind of became Space Marines again, and that's not bad. It's just a different interaction. I don't prefer the more elite armies for a number of reasons. Uh, every loss feels really bad when you're playing with a lower model count. So you have to really kind of pick and choose your battles a little bit differently, So, but like I said, I think White Scars have some good playability. Depending on the missions, I think you could do the White Scar secondary. I think you could do oaths, and then potentially, depending on how your list is built, you could probably do Nachmund. And I think Nachmund is really, what was that? Was that important? Oh no, okay, cool. Nachmund is well, it's not the auto take that it used to be. I think it's pretty good still. Like it's still effectively, for certain lists and builds, like a guaranteed 12 points. No, you know, um, like like a good example is Gene Stealer Cult. You take and I haven't looked to see what their secondaries are in Nephilim, but I think if you wanted to, you could just take Nachmund and behind enemy lines and still effectively cap both of those, especially with GSC. But I'd have to look. I haven't looked at that codex in a while. And you could probably do it with Marines. They've got what is it? An action and shoot stratagem, so you don't necessarily lose some of your efficiency. So you can put some inceptors into the air, bring them down, and drop just a bucket of dice on something, and still do Nachmund. And if you wanted to, you could make it a 6-man squad just so you could guarantee that it goes off. That's actually how my Drukhari list is built right now. Is I've got a 6-man squad of mandrakes, and those mandrakes, um, you know, they Nachmund, and then I can teleport them once per game, and then they can Nachmund again, and I've got Scourges that can do it out of Deep Strike if I need it. So I've got some flexibility. Like I just played a game against some Harlequins not that long ago, and I capped Nachmund because of the mandrakes and their mobility. No, I think I got 8 on Nachmund, and that's because I made a positioning error. I should have, when I charged with my mandrakes, I should have uh, made sure I piled in and everything and consolidated, and I didn't. I just kind of like let them attack, moved on. But had I actually taken that full movement, I'm pretty confident I could have capped Nachmund. Instead, I got 8 on it, and again, that was my fault. I just kind of he and I both at that point in the game, because I think we were at turn 4, and he and I kind of knew the conclusion of that game because I was able to really just. I went first, which is weird because normally with Drukari I don't necessarily want to go first because I'm not playing the meta turn 1 advance and charge, you know. So I'm wanting you to kind of put yourself out there first, and if you put yourself out there first, I can counter charge you and counter swing. But anyway, so I've been looking into Marines for a couple reasons. One is we do have a couple of Marine players on the team. By a couple, I mean just I think two and a half, because Kyle plays Marines, but Kyle plays like just like Imperium. He likes the interaction, and he'll bring like soup and stuff like that. He brings a bunch of silly things, and it's good. It's funny, you know, and that's our goal. Like we have some really good players on our team, and what I love about it though is that we're not all just like win at all costs, go buy the new meta army and dunk on people. Like we have a lot of creativity in the team and a lot of people who are willing to explore a lot of off meta things. And so it creates a really cool dynamic. We have a lot of group discussions and stuff about how to score with different armies. It's pretty neat. But you know, so we have a couple Marine players, and I'm trying to kind of help one of them in particular who's been out of competitive Warhammer for the past year. He's been doing other things, mostly just working on Napoleonics with his buddy. His buddy has his own published war game, so he's been going to conventions with that guy and doing stuff. So we've been trying to kind of help him get back into competitive 40k by looking at like the different secondaries and stuff. And honestly, I mean, and again, if we're just being open and honest, part of it is that anytime I do a stream game, if one of the armies is Marines, we get literally double the views as if, you know, than if they weren't, you know. Uh, anytime Tyler brings Black Templars, we get double the views easily, hands down. Space Wolves, double the views, hands down. So it's one of those where I, as a content creator, I recognize that I need to kind of play into that a little bit. And not that every game needs to have Marines, but I need to do things in order to kind of placate, for lack of a better word. Like it's not coming to my head, but you know, just kind of get a bigger audience. You know, that's what we create content for. We create content so that we can do something that we enjoy, but we have to be willing to make compromises and sacrifices in order to do that, you know? So it's cool. What can I do to help increase my viewership? I guess I can just build a Marine army and we can play Marines on stream every once in a while, and I can just make sure there's a Marine army that can be used at all times. So, oh, we got another follower too. That's awesome. So we're up to 40, I think 44. I think 6 more and we hit that magical 50. And I just got to start getting my average viewers up. And I'm sure part of that is the times that I'm streaming. But my hope is that I can kind of catch the like night shifters and the early morning risers and kind of use this as more of almost like a talk radio platform, you know, like a morning radio show. So if we can get there, we're good. We're golden. You know, I call it hobby hangout and I do build stuff, but like the emphasis is more on the conversation that I have with everybody. So that is the goal. What we got? We got one viewer right now. I'm killing it. Killing it. And I know part of it is because like I've been inconsistent with the scheduling, you know, and that does influence a lot. But now that I've got this set up and we've got a set schedule, like I've got my days, Tyler has his days, and then the games. And the games, do the best, obviously, you know, which is why we're working to do more games every week, you know. We're going to be doing a D&D game every other Sunday. And aside from a D&D game every other Sunday, what are we doing? We're going to try to do an extra 40k game every other Saturday, and it doesn't have to be 40k. It's just where we're going to start. And I think that's it for now. Like, we'll do Thursdays every other Saturdays, and then D&D every other Sundays. The every other Saturday is going to be a little tough until the first of the year, just because there's so much going on with holidays and everything. But we're going to get there, and we're going to do it. And we're killing it. All right. Most of this stuff does just go onto YouTube when we're done. Some of it doesn't. Like the hobby hangouts, I don't know that they're going to keep going to YouTube. I think they're going to just kind of do what they do unless there's something important in them. Like in one of them, we had a discussion about cheating, you know. That one went to YouTube. This one might go just because we're talking about, you know, Marines and things you kind of do with them to get them doing better. I know right now non-codex Marines are competitively better than codex Marines, but I don't know. I don't know why. I haven't looked into it. I don't know enough about Marines to be able to give a good opinion on it. I could guess, but I would assume that it's mostly because Codex Marines get less rules and support than non-Codex Marines. Like, I don't know that any of the Codex Marine. I don't know that any of their supplements have been released yet. Like, I think the only ones that have come out have been non-compliant. I don't know if Dark Angels are compliant or not. Again, we don't follow the Marines here. You know, like I said, most of the people that we play with consistently are Xenos players. You know, a little bit of Chaos, but mostly Xenos. And we're just this weird bubble of Xenos, like in the Midwest. The Midwest is relatively well known for being power armor fanboys of one sort or another, whether it's you know, Chaos or Imperium. And we just have this weird little bubble of Xenos players, and it's funny. It's so weird. Um, let's see, secondaries that they have. Like I said, they've got O's. O's is situationally good still. Uh, Obviously, you can only score 3 points on it, but it's not bad. Like, it's still worth taking in the right mission. And the right mission to me is one that has an objective in the middle of the board, because then you're not just wasting a unit sitting in the middle of the board. You know, if there's an objective in the middle of the board and you can put a unit in the middle of the board to hold that objective, and so you'll get primary points for being on it, and you'll get your oath points for being on it. I feel like that's worth, you know. I do think that's worth. And then honestly, at that point, if you're doing oaths and you're going to be in the middle of the board, depending on what your list looks like, I would almost consider Warp Ritual, just because you're going to be in the middle anyway. You know, and this is kind of how my brain interacts with secondary objectives, is where am I going to be? What do I need to score? And is there ways to layer it so I can just score more points for doing it? You know, it's why even if I'm only scoring like 10 or 11 points on no prisoners, depending on who and what I'm playing against, I'm going to just take no prisoners, because I'm just getting points for playing, and it just kind of takes some of the pressure off of me. Like, I know what I need to do. I'm not super worried about getting that 100-point game every game. simply because I don't play whatever the top tier meta armies are. So I just kind of know that for the most part, the 100-point game is fantasy as opposed to reality. Uh, and I don't have to score 100 points to win. I just have to score more than you. Will it affect my placing at the end of a tournament? Sure, it could. But at the end of the day, like, cool, man. Necrons can just basically 100 point every game without even really trying. So what am I going to do? Like, if I hit Necrons, what am I going to do? If I hit Sisters, what am I going to do? Their secondaries that are just so good that they can effectively get their 100 points without having to really do much. So I'm not going to stress myself out trying to get this perfect game. And even into Necrons and Sisters, like, I don't need 100 points. I just need to score more than you, you know? And that's the way it is. But that's that's a different topic for a different discussion, or a discussion for a different day. The issues we see with competitive play. Where is my hobby knife? But Warp Brit, like I was saying, you can get 12 points on it. And if you can score, oh my gosh, it's way over there. If you can score 12 points on oaths, I feel like that's worth. Give me 1 second. I gotta get my knife. If you can score 12 points on oaths, which or even 10, like 10's not perfect, but 10 just means you were within 6 inches of the center for 5 turns, and you didn't fall back or fail a leadership check for 5 turns. That doesn't even include getting your extra for killing a character, vehicle, or monster. You know, and the other thing, so again, like I said, like this is kind of how I pick my secondaries. If I am going against, like, let's say I'm going against orcs, right? And let's say they have a vehicle heavy build. I might take oaths if there's an objective in the center. Let's double check and make sure I'm not making shit up. Warhammer Oaths of, oh, cool. Moment. Yeah, you score 1 point, character, vehicle, or monster at the end of the battle round, and that's the other thing too, is it's at the end of the battle round, so that could be tough. But it is 1 point if a core or character is within 6, and then 1 point if you didn't fail morale or fall back. Cool, cool, cool. That's what I thought. Oh man, my Instagram is actually like getting a little bit better. That's cool. Oh no, don't take a picture of me. We're gonna boop. Twitch, sorry, .tv forwards. Bam. All right, sorry. But yeah, it's, what was I saying? Oaths, yeah. So, oaths is weird. Like I said, it's kind of situational, but I think you could consistently get 10 if you build 4 oaths and you just understand that, it's only going to be good, like really good, if there's objectives in the middle. And then if there aren't objectives in the middle, you just find a different secondary to take. So again, let's talk about playing White Scars, because that's what I had said. Because if I were ever going to build a Marine army, it would be White Scars. That's just how I play the game. And, you know, I tend to be melee first, so we'll just kind of focus on the melee first. Welcome to the stream. Got a new visitor here. Awesome. But yeah, so if you're playing, give me a second. Dude, that's funny. They basically gave me a warning because you said honky. And I get it. It's just funny because, you know, that's just like how we talk. And then Twitch was just like, nah, dude. But yeah, I'm just kind of going over some ideas for playing Marines competitively. I've you know, gonna be helping Bailey get back into competitive shape here. So just kind of voicing my thoughts on ways to get them competitive, you know, because everybody poo-poos Marines and they think they're bad. And they aren't necessarily good, but they aren't bad. I think they're better than their player base, if that makes sense. So, you know, and that's where I was at, was if I were gonna play Marines, I would play White Scars. And this makes sense, as you know. Like, that's just how I play the game. And I would probably most games be taking that White Scar secondary, where I just score points for killing things in melee. You get 1 point for killing a unit in melee, and you get 3 points for killing, I think it's a vehicle character and or monster. I'd have to double check. It might not be vehicle, but I think that is the interaction. So it's one of those where, yeah, no, just get points for playing the game. That seems like a legitimate way to play. Uh, and then if you're doing one like Abandoned Sanctuaries or another mission where there's an objective in the middle of the board, I think I take Oaths. And if I take Oaths, I think I take Warp Brit, because I've got to be in the middle of the board anyway. So if I've got to be there, I might as well take 2 secondaries that layer and, you know, minimize my need to be all over the table, because then I can turn the game into a fight over the middle, which is what Marines want. They want a fight over the middle of the board. They don't want to basically be trying to win out while they're all spread out on the flanks and everywhere. So if you can concentrate the fight to the middle of the board, I think that's a big win for Marines. It's not like playing Drukhari where you don't want the middle of the board. You know, you want your opponent in the middle. And that's how most elf armies interact also. You know, they're not holding the middle. So they don't want to get engaged in a fight for the middle. They want to be able to push you out to the flanks and kind of separate your army into pieces and then just pick you apart. So I think that's like the goal is to, you know, try to take objectives that are easy to score. Don't worry about capping them. Just worry about taking ones that will score you points easily and reliably. Because then you just focus on scoring your points and doing what you can to minimize your opponent's scoring. You know, so like I said, I think the librarian's a good choice because of the spell selection anyway. Like, you can take Null Zone, you could take Psychic Fortress. So you can either have an aura of no invulnerable saves. I did throw that in there. Or you can have a 5-up invulnerable save aura, which becomes less relevant now because of Armor of Contempt, but it's still not bad. You know, there's some pretty high AP stuff that's still out there. You know, like the Orc Kill Saws are still neg 4, so that is still a thing. That didn't change from 8th. You know, so just having that invulnerable save is better than not having it. Meltas are neg 4, so getting a 5-up instead of a 6-up is still really good. It's, you know, 16% better, one would say. And then, you know, most of the stuff that's like stupid high AP, either a lot of it's just going to ignore your invuln anyway, like the hammerhead and the fire prism. But the fire prism only does it on a strat. That doesn't just do it inherently, but I think they're -5. So it does give you a save against that type of stuff too. So, and then like some of the Tau stuff though is like I think their rail guns are like -4 or -5 outside of the hammerhead. I'd have to look. Like they're pretty spicy. So to me the librarian's still just like an auto include. If you can take him, you do take him. Uh, Now I don't think Marines have an action like a psychic action and cast ability. So if you do take Warp Writ, there are just 3 turns where you're not getting your librarian, and that's not necessarily a big deal. Just you have to be mindful of that is all. The other thing to keep in mind is terrain will influence a lot. If it is GW terrain and you're on a shortboard mission, maybe you don't try to fight over the middle because there's just no goddamn cover. It's not my favorite interaction with their tables, but it is an interaction. Okay. And then the third one, you know, I don't know that Marines have an auto take for the third one. You could do the one where you take objectives from your opponent, and if you could do that for 3 turns, you got 12 points. Like that going to 4 points does make it a lot more viable because you know if you cap Warp Writ or you take Nachmund, you know you can do Nachmund. Marines have a lot of ways to do that one, especially with their come in from deep strike, shoot, action, like stratagems and stuff like that. Uh, they have a lot of ways to kind of work around Nachmund. You know, if you can cap Nachmund and you can cap Warp Writ and you can cap your primaries, and you only get, let's say you only get 10 points on your last secondary, you still got 24, 34, plus 45, 79. So you're going to get 89 points. Like, that's respectable. You know, is it going to win every game? No. But man, like I said before, it's just certain armies. When you play against them, if your opponent even has any kind of skill, like they don't even have to be good, they just have to be not bad. They're just going to get 90 plus points every game. Like it's just kind of how it is. So, and that's arguably why maybe some of these faction secondaries just need to go away, and maybe we just open up these secondaries to every army. You know, instead of sisters being the only army that can take the shrine, we just make it a generic secondary that every army can take, or we bring back what was that, battlefield supremacy, where you hold 3 and more. You know, bring that one back. That'd be good. Because certain armies have a good version of that, and certain armies don't. You know, and I think right now, with a few exceptions, the game's generally okay in terms of balance. It's not great. But again, that was all touched on my statistics video. You know, you can't look at tournament win rates and determine game balance. You know, you literally can't. Because certain armies are just better than others, and that's honestly just kind of the nature of playing a game like this. But and then for my build, like if I were gonna do White Scars for my build, I'd probably have 2 units of aggressors in White Scars. Honestly, they're just super good. Being able to advance and shoot and charge, and you know having the ability to activate the assault doctrine for aggressors, so that they can get 3 damage power fists is really good. Their core, so what's his name? The Khan. You can take the Khan, and he gives them +1 to wound if he's within, I think it's 6 inches, you know, so he can just be like, you're strength 8, neg 3, 2 damage, but 3 damage, but now you're also +1 to wound, you know, and that's going to be super relevant. And they'd actually, because you lock the assault doctrine, you could put them at -4, which into power armor becomes -3. But now you have power fists that are wounding. What you call it? Land Raiders, the T9 stuff. You can have that getting wounded on 4s. And then in addition, there's some ways to give them +1 strength. So now they become strength 9 power fists +1 to wound. So you can wound like those T9 vehicles on 3s. You know, with -4 but -3, but so you're just doing like a 5 up and then 3 damage. So it's not a bad interaction. You've got ways to do damage. And I think aggressors are kind of like an unsung or underappreciated unit right now, because in most armies I don't think they're good. You know, I think they're kind of a waste in most Marine builds, but I do think there's a handful of armies where they're really good. I think obviously Salamanders because of the Flamer interactions, and I think maybe even Blood Angels, they could be good. That +1 to wound could be very good. And then the what is it? They get +1 to their charge, I believe. And then all the bonus attacks that they can get. So there's some. I think there's some play there. But in the White Scars, like I said, I think I'd probably run 2 5-mans of those, and I think I'd probably bring an Apothecary because they're Gravis. So they're T5, 3 wounds. They have I forget what the strat's actually called, but it effectively gives them all as dust, so they can add 1 to their saves against 1 damage weapons. So they're T5, 3 up save. You can get them to 2 up with cover, or you can get them to 2 up against 1 damage weapons. Armor of Contempt. So there's a lot of good interactions there you can get for them. And with the Apothecary, you can get them a 6 up. If they're within range of the Librarian, you can give them a 5 up invuln for like super big stuff that's probably going to get thrown their way. And then the Apothecary, obviously, you can start putting models back as well. So it's one of those where I think that's a solid unit that you could make pretty tanky, and you could just, that could be your I'm holding the center of the board unit if you do take odes. And honestly, I'd probably just put both of them there just to be safe, because there are some things that will still just kind of shred that. And you want that Apothecary so you at least get to roll dice against like mortal wound heavy armies, like the T-Suns and the Nids of the world. And that way you're not just picking up bodies to mortal wounds. But then, yeah, like I said, on the charge, if somebody does get close enough and they want to fuck around, they could just find out, because they can fall back and shoot and charge, and not shoot, just fall back and charge, and sure, like you lose your 1 point for odes, but that could end up being the difference between killing a unit and not killing a unit. You know, getting that bonus damage on the charge, and the ability to just kind of make sure that they fight in the fight first priority. And I think that's where instead of bikes, I think that's where I build the core of my army. If I do that, and you could still bring Outriders, don't get me wrong. I think 2 units of Outriders is basically still an auto take with that army, just because they can cover so much ground. They can do so much distance that they're effectively always a threat. They're just always going to be a potential threat on the table, and you just kind of hold them back and use them turns 3 and 4 for maybe like some cleanup and counter charges and stuff like that, because they can effectively just always advance unless you need them to shoot. And I believe the Outriders auto advance 6, so they're clearing about 20 inches every turn. So that's, a good interaction. I think the named character, is an auto include in every White Scars build, just because of the +1 to wound. You can pick a unit within 6, and they just get like Blood Angels. Like they just +1 to wound on the charge. You know, again, Blade Guard are also really good when you, especially with that, because they're strength 5 with their power swords. And then if you put them in the Assault Doctrine, they're 3 damage power swords on the charge with +1 to wound. And that's a lot of dice. And they're neg 4. Neg 3 but neg 4. So again, it's just a lot of 3 damage dice, and they're not quite as tanky, but they do have a 2-up save innately. Like, they don't get Armor of Contempt, but they got a 3-up with a Storm Shield, so they have a 4-up invuln also. So it's one of those where, like, still a relatively tanky unit. I personally would probably try the aggressors first, and then maybe go to Blade Guard just to, if I don't like the way the aggressors feel, because I think the Gravis, the T5, and the access to the reduce or adding to your save stratagem is going to help keep them on the table a little bit better. If you end up hitting into like a Tau player, or there's a lot of just spamming 1 damage attacks. Demons, they're flamers, for example. They're neg 2 flamers, but hey, guess what? You can add 1 to your save and then Armor of Contempt and just have your 3-up save. And then if you're in cover, you could just have a 2-up save. So it's one of those where I just feel like they're going to stay on the table a little bit better. And like I said, I get why people kind of poo-poo them, because their data sheet's a little underwhelming. But I do think that there's a couple armies where it becomes really good. HQs, like I said, I'd probably bring a librarian. Definitely the con. I might bring a chaplain. That one I'm kind of on the fence about. I think suppressors you want because of their ability to shut off Overwatch for infantry. I think that's an important interaction when you're playing a very melee-centric army. So the suppressors, I think, are good. I could do a chaplain on a bike. I could do a chaplain in a jump pack. It would depend on what the rest of the army look like, to be honest. If I fill it out with some Vanguard veterans and then give them jump packs, I probably take the chaplain on a jump pack as well, just so I can deep strike him and then come down and get the +2 to my charge rolls. Yeah, and that's also super fair because of the buffs that they give. They can be pretty bonkers as well. The only thing I like, the Outriders I like, at least specifically in White Scars. I'd have to look and see if the White Scars have any White Scar specific litanies. I don't know that they do right now because they're still an 8th ed book. But I mean, you're not wrong. Being able to reroll hit rolls. I don't know if they have any kind of like +1 to wound interactions for melee. I know they do for shooting. But even that would be funny. Like, having those bolt guns get +1 to wound, because there's a lot of dice that come out of them for shooting as well. But you get reroll hit rolls, and then you can do the +2 to charge, and then I think there's a relic or warlord trait for White Scars where you can add an additional 1 to charges. So I think you can actually layer it to get +3 to charge. So that is worth. I'd have to look at, like I said, the chaplains a little bit more. I'm not necessarily down on them. Yeah, Twitch is killing me sometimes, man. Like, again, I get what's going on here, but it's just funny, some of these like warnings. It's like, what is going on? But yeah, the +1 to your charge roll I think is really good. And like I said, I'm pretty sure that's a relic or warlord trait that the white scars get. And I think that's an aura. So you could, like I said, effectively get like a +3 to your charge roll. Alright, I'll get to that in a minute. So you can make sure they get into combat. And then, you know, like if you do lock them into the assault doctrine, it's a strat for white scars. They don't really have any interactions like the Blood Angels do that do it, but I think part of that is just because they're still an 8th ed book. I'm sure. You know, like I said, they're still an 8th ed book, so I think part of that interaction is just because they're still using the older rules. But you could have 2 damage power swords, man, or chain swords, and it's so many dice. What is it, like 21 attacks out of 3 dudes? I think it is, with the Outriders. It's something bonkers like that. You know, and if you get the reroll hit rolls litany going off, you're basically going to hit with 90% of them. I don't think they have any kind of like 6s explode interactions, but that's okay. Like, that's just really, really mean. Just the amount of dice and the ability to do 2 damage with your chain swords. And I know a lot of stuff reduces damage, so it's not going to be super relevant against certain things, you know, like Death Guard. But 3 damage Blade Guard would be super relevant because they're just one-shotting a lot of stuff. And they'll chew through like Terminators, the Blade Guard Terminators, because it only takes 2 failed saves to kill one instead of 3. You know, so there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of play there. And I'm not saying people haven't already thought of this. I just think, like, when I look at a lot of the Marine lists that come to tournaments, man, they're all, so many of them are just the same. And it's arguably a big part of why Marines aren't doing well competitively. Dog, I need you to move your fat butt. I don't know why you always have to sleep on my feet. There we go. All right. What do we got? Oh, these can go in the box also. Oh no. Throwing hands. I feel like I'm missing something. There it is. I found it. We got there. All right. Like, I would have to see what the other secondaries are for Marines, because I only know 2 of them off the top of my head. I know the one that just got changed where you get 4 victory points now instead of 3. Yeah, because so they get shock assault. So it's 4 attacks, but then they each get an additional 2 attacks on the charge. So it's 6 attacks. That's what it is. Okay. So it's 6 attacks, and then the sergeant gets 7. So it's 19 dice, right? Yeah, that's the math. I knew it was somewhere in there. Like, it was an absurd amount of attacks out of three models. Um, you know, and when I was looking at it, my goal was to just try to use as much Primaris stuff when I was kind of like theory crafting a list as I could. And that's mostly because I just don't know what the fate of Firstborn stuff is going to be yet. So I didn't want to get too like, oh, well, you could just take Vanguard vets, and you could just take this, because I think we're gonna see some kind of like pseudo Vanguard vet type unit for Marines here soon for the Primaris. By soon I just mean like probably by 10th edition, if not 10th edition. We'll see. But I do think Marines are going to start getting some of their Primaris line kind of filled out a little bit more. And I don't know. I don't know. But I almost feel like the firstborn are gonna like start getting separated slowly, and they might become their own army. They might even just get kind of phased out because of Horus Heresy. I don't know. Because I feel like it'll be a while if they do phase them out, and they'll kind of like use the storyline to justify phasing them out in some way, shape, or form, or at least to separate the two armies into two different books, rather than here's a book with just like a 200 data sheets. Because interestingly, like Primaris Marines suffer from the same, like Marines have a similar interaction to Orcs in that regard. All the Beast Snaga stuff just interacts with Beast Snaga stuff, and it's super weird. Um, Whereas like all the regular Orcs interact with everything, which is also weird. You know, So like my regular war boss, his +1 to hit applies to all orcs. But my Beast Snaga boss, his +1 to hit only applies to Beast Snaga units. So I look at these Beast Snaga bosses and I'm just like, why would I ever run these? Because they're so limited compared to, like, unless I'm just doing a heavy Snaga army, I don't understand why I would ever bring that. Like, sure, the boss on Squigosaur is neat, and he's not bad, but I can just bring a war boss and mega armor, and he's just better. You know, you can give him he's got a higher strength when he makes his attacks. Sure, he doesn't have the weird squig attacks that do extra mortal wounds on wound rolls of 6, but he's T6. He's 7 wounds, 2 up save, and then 5 up invuln, but you can give him a 4 up invuln and have incoming damage, with the super cyborg body, and then you can give him art as nails, so he's -1 to wound. So you can have a 2 up, 4 up, have damage, -1 to wound T6 model that's surprisingly tanky. Like, he can be pretty hard to shift. So you can have that, and he's 115 points compared to like 160 that the Squigosaur boss gets. He's got a higher base strength. He's strength 6, but his huge choppa is like +3, -3, 2 damage. So it's like I think he's either strength 8 or strength 9. I don't remember base. Whereas the beast boss is like strength 6. Like, he doesn't get any strength bonuses unless you give him a relic. So like I said, like, I see these beast bosses and I'm just like, why would I ever take this? I don't understand. Like, they're not numerically, they're just not justifiably good enough for me to consider them. Now, I know some people do, and some people enjoy their interactions. But when I'm building lists, I'm just like, hey, mega knobs, mega armor, uh, war boss, and mega armor. Like, these are the best things to me. So, new viewer in here, welcome to the stream. We were talking about Marines, kind of segued into orcs, but we're probably going to get back onto the Marine chat for a little bit longer. But yeah, I'd have to look into their secondaries and see what else is viable. But I do think, like I said, I think R&D could be a very viable, consistent secondary. I think most games, Marine players could cap it. It's just going to cost resources. You need the 2 CP, or you need to build units that's their function. That's what they do. They don't do anything else but R&D, and that's okay. You know, like maybe a unit of Vanguard vets if you wanted to go that route with jump packs, and they don't even have to have anything. Like they're just a throwaway unit for scoring like R&D or behind enemy lines. Because I don't think the regular shooty veterans can get jump packs. I think if you want to deep strike them, they have to go into a drop pod, which you could definitely do also. And if your opponent leaves an opening, like you can get those drop pods and be effective with them. You know, and you could arguably have 2 units for if you wanted to do behind enemy lines also. Like these are ways to kind of look at it. Oh no, that did not glue super well. I guess we're gonna have to re-glue that. There we go. I just now realized too, Jimmy, that said Outsiders, not Outriders. This whole time I've been looking at it and reading it as Outriders, and just now realized that either it auto-corrected you or you fat-thumbed uh, Outsiders, which is still funny. Like, I like it. You know, I don't know where the hang-up is, why Marines are quote-unquote bad right now, other than, like I said, like from my experience, there's no creativity. That's right, man. Jesus, take the wheel, which is probably also going to get a Twitch warning. You know, there's not a lot of creativity from what I've seen in Marine lists. Like so many of them are just copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. And then, you know, when you see that, and then Marine players are just like Marines aren't good, it's really hard for me to take that seriously because it's like, have you tried not just getting on Reddit and having somebody tell you how to play your army and just actually reading your codex and understanding that you have so many good units in there, like so many good utility units in there. You know, you have 2 or 3 different units that can shut off Overwatch to some capacity, which depending on could be a very relevant interaction. You know, Tower's still very good, and while they don't have the greater good as an interaction, their Overwatch can still be devastating just because of the quantity of fire, and then they have a way to get it for free on a unit. So having the utility of shutting off Overwatch is still really good. Um, doing it against Eldar also really good, depending on the build. You know, Dire Avengers are a really good utility unit that can obsec, and I believe they still have an interaction that lets them Overwatch on 5s. I think it's one of the Exarch powers. I could be wrong on that. So you know, again, it's so many dice. So shutting that off, right? And that's it. Is if you've got a whirlwind, you can shut it off for vehicles. If you've got the suppressors, it only works on infantry. Um, but the fact that it exists is what's important. You know, like these things are there and they're very good. They've got a lot of utility. And I just like even in Chicago, like the Marines list that I saw were mostly just copy paste. Like here's my 2 or 3 Redemptors, um, and even just different chapters, it was still just the same builds. It was just like, yeah, all right, man. Like, don't complain that your army's not good if you're not going to try to do anything else other than what everybody else is doing. And I'm curious to see how those vehicles change in the Codex, like the Hellhounds. I feel like those things are probably gonna like. To me, Hellhounds are either gonna be really good or really bad. There's not gonna be an in between for them. Oh no, my bits are falling off. My jangly bits. Like I'm definitely curious to see the Hellhound chassis data sheets. I don't know how they're going to interact, but like the Devil Dog and the what is it, the Banehound? Like I'm curious to see how all those interact, because those were some of my favorite units out of that book in 8th. Wow, you could stop falling apart and I'd be super fucking happy. I should probably just hold it in place for a minute instead of constantly trying to move it as soon as I get it glued. I mean, this is definitely a me problem, not a... Alright, so that one's in. I'm just trying to set it off to the side so it can dry, but I guess that's not what we're doing. You know, but like I said, I think with Marines, I would probably look at, because there's a lot of overlap for some of these secondaries, so I'd probably look at like 4 different secondaries that I feel like I could score consistently and try to figure out a way to just like build around those 4. You know, because if you take oaths, like if you plan on taking oaths, you're going to have some resilient units that can sit on the center of the board. You know, so you could, if you don't have an objective in the middle, you could just plan for a different secondary. Like building 4 tanking the middle of the board is just going to be also just building 4 primaries, which, you know, hey, I think that's where a lot of games are won and lost. Oh, Bailey talking shit. But you know, in addition, if you build for Nachmund with Marines specifically, I think you actually can just build for behind enemy lines inadvertently. Now, obviously, it's not guaranteed, and those are, especially behind enemy lines, is kind of situational. You know, if you've got a player who can screen you out effectively and has the units and the staying power to screen you out, then that's not the best interaction. But you know, you've got the infiltrators or incursors, whichever one of those two, maybe both of them. It might just be a Phobos ability, where you can just pick the unit up and put it in strategic reserves and then put it back down later. Like, there's so much utility in that codex. So I don't understand how people are not scoring points with it. And maybe it's because I don't play it. Maybe I need to play it to understand, but I just I don't understand how people are just struggling to score points with this codex. Armor of Contempt is a thing. Like, I don't enjoy that interaction as a person who plays not Marines. But I feel like it helps them quite a bit, and I don't know what else you could do, you know? All right. Homeboy left because I was dogging on Marine players. I don't know if that's true or not. I was just playing. As a former Army veteran, though, nothing makes me happier than just dunking on Marines. Ha. What do we got here? Boop, boop, boop. All right. So the old world is coming back, which is cool. Gonna use use this to kind of segue into a different conversation. Pretty excited for that. I'd like to see what the rules are. I have very tempered expectations. I was not a huge fan of 8th edition fantasy, and I feel like that's probably where the game will go. But I'm still going to be at least open-minded enough to give it a try when it comes out. I did enjoy the fantasy a lot more than I enjoy Age of Sigmar. You know, that game does not appeal to me in any way, shape, or form. So we'll have to see how the old world interacts. Bro, you're not wrong. I'm aging like fine wine. That's what it is. I'm also wearing a hat, so you can't see like my mess of gray hair. That helps as well. We were actually just talking about Marines. It is a good, like almost hour-long talk about Marines and why Marines are struggling competitively. I don't know if you know actual loyalist Marine players, Dan, but if you do and you have some input, I'd love to hear it. Because I know you do girds and sisters. I've got some theories on it, and most of them just stem from. Oh, is that what it is? Yeah. So it's all right as long as it's graying and not just gray. It's actually like what I get told on a regular basis. Like once this shit is actually gray, I was told I get to dye it. Uh, I've got almost one whole box done. We are making good time. Yeah, it's weird. And that's so I think Armor of Contempt in some ways holds Marine players back, oddly enough, because I feel like because it exists, Marine players and trigger warning, I think Marine players in general are some of the sloppier players of the game. And that's nothing again, like I'm not putting down anybody. I think it has to do with the way the rules are set up for Marines. Like I think playing Marines has always kind of allowed for some sloppy play. And Armor of Contempt just kind of promotes some more sloppy play. Right. And oddly enough, like it can be more than that. Like let's look at a 3-up save against -1 AP while you're in cover. You now have a 2-up save. Like that's arguably a 33% swing, you know. It's such a weird interaction. And that's where I'm at with is I think basically what's going on is people are like, I have Armor of Contempt, I don't need to use terrain. I don't need to have cover. I should just be able to stand out in the open. And I think that's a lot of it, man. And I think like when the new Marine Codex came out, they were still good, but they weren't the silly like just do whatever they want army that they were in the end of 8th edition because of Psychic Awakening. Like those Psychic Awakening books and the second Marine Codex really just kind of put them over the edge, you know, to where it was like you couldn't even really play a game against them. But so when that codex dropped and they were actually kind of balanced, there was a lot of outcry about, oh, Marines are bad. No, they're not bad. They're just not broken. Like, you can actually play against them and win without like having to play a perfect game every time. So I think I do think that contributes to it. And my thoughts on it are, and I covered this with Jimmy. I don't know if he's still in here or not. He might have taken off because he's usually at work. But my thoughts on it are that Armor of Contempt kind of promotes sloppy play. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, Codex Marines are arguably worse than non-compliant Marines, and a lot of that has to do with they just get extra rules. And I don't think there are very many, if any, Ninth Ed Codex compliant Marine supplements. Like, um, I think most of the Marine supplements that have come out have just been like Space Wolves, Blood Angels, like the ones that are non-compliant. And I think that also just kind of affects it. But I'd like to see. Yeah, I get that. I'd say part of it is just having been to like at the Chicago Open. Like, I was just talking to Jimmy about this, and at the Chicago Open, when I was doing judging for 40K and I was walking through the tables, anytime I saw Marines, almost every single list was identical. You know, here's my 3 Redemptors, here's my this. It was a lot of just the same, and it was just really weird. Like, when I see Ultramarines lists, they're almost always the same. It's almost always like, here's 3 Redemptors and Bobby G. And I'm not saying that's bad, but if you're winning, if your army has a winning rate of whatever it is right now, I don't think you get to complain about it when you're just doing what everybody else is doing and you're still not winning games. And that's kind of what I think about it is, what are you doing to change what's going on? What are you doing to fix the interaction as a player? Like, there are things that are really good in that book. And there are things that are faction or chapter specific that are good. And that's, like I said, like Jimmy and I were just talking about that, like how they have 2 or 3 different units at least that can shut off Overwatch. And while that's not necessarily like the best interaction to have in the game, because Overwatch is limited to 1 unit now instead of everybody, it's an interaction, and into certain armies it's really good. And I think that's actually probably where you came in, is when I was talking about Dire Avengers and Tau specifically. Those 2 armies, if you can shut off their Overwatch, and those are 2 solid armies, and arguably, like, Craft Worlds also have a really low win rate right now, like in the realm of what vanilla Marines are, Codex Marines. But I think that's also just less to do with Craft Worlds being bad and more to do with yeah, and that's what I was getting ready to say, is people don't want to explore other options. Um, you know, Competitive players seem to be a little slow to adapt. And sometimes it's not that the codex is bad, it's that the other codexes that are winning are so good, and the player base grows when a codex is good competitively. And the other thing too is that when a codex is bad, we have to look at whether or not it's the whole codex or not. Marines are a different animal when you kind of look at it because they just so much. But with the dominant codexes right now being ones that just spew mortal wounds en masse, or just don't have to interact with you, certain armies are just going to struggle competitively when that's the interaction that the competitive game has. Sisters and Necrons can score a lot of points without even interacting with you if you build towards it, right? And Marines are generally slow. So if Sisters can ramp their points early by not interacting with you, by the time Marine players have caught up or gotten into wherever they need to be in order to kind of start really scoring their secondaries and doing the things that they need to do, the Sisters players probably already gotten enough points that it's not going to matter. Necrons, I mean, we all know that interaction where it's like, if I just put models on the table, I'm probably scoring 90 plus points because of how ridiculously easy their secondaries are. So those are also interactions that exist, and those do influence the win rate and the competitiveness of other books. Right, right. And that's exactly it. All you have to do is hold your shrine every turn and use miracle dice. I don't know what the other secondary you could or would take is, but I do know those two are basically like the two that really carry Sisters players, and that's why we get that's why we get players who win tournaments, and I'm not trying to call anybody out, but we get players who win tournaments, and then they're not necessarily like super great at the game, but they're winning because they're just buying the army that allows them to win without actually having to play. You know, and I have seen that. I've seen that happen a couple times. So I'm curious to see how that kind of interaction will change in the future. But arguably, like, you know, part of the reason Marines struggle is that the dominant armies are either I don't have to interact with you to score most of my points, or I just spew so many mortal wounds. Oh yeah, it's the Shadow Ops one. Or you get NIDs, which they're just like, hey, here's 30 mortal wounds a turn, and Marines just don't have a defense for that for the most part, unless you specifically build to counter it. Um, but with Marines, if you're building to counter mortal wounds, you are sacrificing quite a bit. I do recognize that. Um, so you've got that interaction. Who else? A lot of the demon soup builds also are just a lot of mortal wounds because of the Zinch demons and you know that whole interaction. So again, not a good. So it's like you've got a handful of armies. Yeah, I wonder if they will change a lot or if they'll kind of stay similar to what they are. Like I wonder if they put those in with the intent that that's what they're going to be when the codex came out, or if they put those in knowing that they were going to change them. You know, I don't know. It's interesting to see that change though. I do. I like a lot of the guard secondaries because they're not bad. Like you can score points with them. They're not easy necessarily to score, but you can do it. Um, It's interesting that most of them, if not all of them, are infantry centric, though. Agree. The flamers of Zinj are severely underpointed by about 5 to 10 points. I would probably start with a 5-point hike, and then if that still seems too cheap, go from there. Like I like seeing small incremental changes rather than sweeping changes, just because sweeping changes can make things go from like unplayable one way to unplayable another. And if they stay the same price, then that strat needs to go up in command points. Like, but to have what is effectively a 3-up invulnerable save against shooting, what are they, T4? I think they're 3 wounds. That sounds right. They might be 2, but I think they're 3 wounds. 12-inch movement. They fly. They have access to the ability to teleport. They have a lot of support, like a lot of rule support. And so I'd like to also see them go up in points. They should not be effectively the same cost as a knob or, an intercessor, which is about where they're at in terms of points. Like, arguably, knobs don't need to be the same cost as an intercessor either. But I don't know. 2 wounds, okay, yeah. I don't know that GW is going to do much else with this orc book other than just be like, deal with it, nerds. Because despite their win percentage, all right, orcs are actually one of the worst competitive armies in the game right now. And I know, a lot of people are just like, oh, no, they've got a 50% win rate. They've got a 50% win rate. No, they don't. Goffs have a 50% win rate. And Blood Axes have a 50% win rate. But Blood Axes only have that win rate because of the campaign book that released so much extra stuff for them. Right. Yeah, and that's it. Is they have one build that wins roughly 50% of their games. But once you get outside of those two cultures, you actually have Death Skulls in third place with a 46% win rate, and Orcs are weird because I think they have 7 cultures. Because they got Goths, they've got Red Suns or Evil Suns, Death Skulls, Snake Bites, Blood Axes, Bad Moons, and Freebooters. So orcs actually have 7 cultures because they have the 6 clans and then Freebooters, which isn't technically a clan. So 2 of them have a 50%. You get the Death Skulls, they sit at 46. And then once you leave those top 3, there is a steep drop off. The next highest is like 36, and Bad Moon sit at 22% right now. Like overall, as a I don't know if you watched that stats video I did, but overall, orcs actually have about a 42% win rate at tournaments because of some weird reporting that goes on. Like some kind of weird reporting happened, and it really just skews their win percentage. There's a couple other armies that have that going on as well. But yeah, so I would like to see a lot of the guard secondaries. Like I said, I'm curious to know if they basically were like, this is our intent for when the book comes out, or if they're going to revamp it for the codex. And I've not looked at a lot of the sister stuff. I might here in a second. Actually, let's do that now. Because I almost wonder if part of the reason Bloody Rose and the steep drop would be because of just the numbers, the sheer volume. Oh, no, it's actually not that bad, Dan. I've got it pulled up right now. They have an overall 55% win rate. Custom has a 46% win rate, but that's literally, and this is starting from January 1st. 5,000 games, 50 of them for custom. So take that for what it's worth. Argent Shroud, though, has about 300 games, and they're sitting at about 53%. So Argent Shroud doing some work. Ebon Chalice, 55-ish. So you've got Unknown, which sits at 55 or 54%, and then Valoris Heart at 54%. And Unknown just means they probably didn't report their chapter. I forget what it's called for Sisters. Um, but so Unknown, I would probably just kind of break that up between the most popular factions is probably how that is. But Bloody Rose holds half of the games. So Bloody Rose is sitting at 2,700 with 56% win rate. Ebon Chalice has about 100 games with a 55% win rate. Martyred Lady sitting pretty low, which is kind of a surprise because they've got some neat interactions that I think are viable. But I think Martyred Lady, the reason they're so low is it's a very infantry focused army when you play that way, and I think that just like you just played the game on hard mode because now you just have a T3 3-up save model with 1 wound, and you're going to be struggling if your positioning's not good. Like once you play a very infantry focused army, especially a T3 one, I think that puts you in hard mode. Sacred Rose is about 44%. So really, Sisters have a pretty tight grouping compared to some of the other armies, but it is either 55 or 45, it looks like, effectively. I shouldn't have pulled this up. Yeah, tank-based secondaries would be pretty neat. I'm curious to also see if Armor of Contempt goes away once that book drops, or if they're going to keep it out. I feel like that's just a permanent rule at this point. I'm not, again, super thrilled about it. It as a person who doesn't play an Imperium army, like it's not a fun interaction for me, especially because like when I play Orcs specifically, it feels really bad because nothing really changed. I just wanted to look at the AdMech numbers because everybody's poo-pooing AdMech. Rizza has a 20% win rate. That's interesting because I feel like that's the strongest faction in that book outside of, Mars. I think it was. I would play Rizza all day long. Like, you're giving me +1 to wound. I will take it. Eldari. Oh, we don't get a breakdown of Eldari. Maybe it's As or Yanni. Maybe Eldari is just when you're souping. Craft Worlds, that's what we want. Craft World's sitting at about 45%. Iandin, real low. Simhan, real low. Ulthway. So Ulthway and probably Biltan and Custom. Yeah, interesting. I'm curious to see the numbers on some of these on the Craft Worlds because that's still a good army. Like it's weird. And again, I do agree. I would love to see some tank-based secondaries. It is odd that they didn't get them, but I don't know how you like. I guess I'm kind of curious to know how you would implement them. You know, like how do you make tank-based secondaries for your army? You know, it's just like you score extra points if you have like a Lehman Russ within range of an objective marker type of thing. I mean, that could actually be a neat interaction for your battlefield supremacy. Is like if you control the objective and you have like a Lehman Russ within range of the objective, you score 1 point for each objective you control that you meet those kind of like qualifiers. That could be an interesting way to do it because then you're having to like use your tanks to actually do things, but then they're still just, you know, still tanks. You're just not able to just like hide them the whole game type of thing. You know, you're actually having to interact. I'm curious to see if they'll keep OBSEC, like if that's an interaction that'll stay. Also curious to see if they will what is it, count as extra bodies. I don't know if that's been leaked or not. Like, do that. This vehicle counts as X amount of bodies. Yeah, I could see that one also. I'm, like I said, I'm really curious to see how this codex is going to interact. Like, there's some weird stuff that I've seen from the leaks, and then like you and I have talked about it, and then a couple other guys have been on here talking about it with me, and it just the whole thing seems just like a weird book, right? Like looking at the rules leaks and stuff, I can tell that this is a late edition codex compared to like Marines or even Drukhari. Like if you look at the Drukhari book now, as bonkers as it was when it launched, like it just seems very tame comparatively now. And honestly, with Drukhari, it was like one specific build that was dominating anyway. Like if can I go back to, I can go to Nachmund. So if we go to Nachmund, evidently it already accounted for that. Yeah. 0-1, 0-1. Oh, there we go. So according to this, Nachmund, $66,000 games. I just need to refresh, I think. I think I screwed something up here. So throughout Nachmund, Sisters had a 47% win rate. This is kind of cool. I'm on that Goonhammer stats site. Yeah, no, everything I've seen from him has been really good. I just haven't seen a ton. And I do, like, I get the Auspex updates too, because that guy's been pretty, you know, quick to basically, like, cover what Morty and Glory's done. So, is kind of a neat interaction. All right. these together. What man, guard were the poo-poo during Nachmund. Chaos Space Marines. Craft Worlds. Curse Blade, Custom, Unknown, yeah. Yeah, that Shadow Sword, so it's weird because like I don't necessarily have an issue with Lords of War being that way, you know, as long as they're pointed efficiently or effectively. But like, you know, when you get bad balance for Lords of War, that creates issues. You know, like when the Tau book first came out and that Storm Surge was cheap, like the same price as a Riptide, for example. Like that's a little silly. And then, you know, Tau getting slapped with the Nerf hammer pretty hard multiple times, where really all they just needed to do was adjust points on units. Like that was the biggest issue. Yeah, and I think 500 is probably a good price for something that's not going to be able to hide. Like that's the main thing is like once that thing hits the table, that's it. We're just going to be able to go ham on it. You know, Tau really just like could have just handled some points adjustments. Like that would have just fixed so many things in that book. When it first released, when you compare their points now to where their points were, they were effectively bringing like 2,800 points worth of models, if I remember right. It was a lot. Like it was a massive points hike, and they're still doing really well. You know, competitively, and it's not just again, it's not just one or two builds or factions. You know, Farsight, Tau Sept, both have really good win rates, and there's multiple builds that are doing it. So, and it's not a big book, so I understand that you know there's going to be some homogenization in list building anyway, just because of the fact that there's not a ton of data sheets in that book. But yeah, no, it's one of those where, man, you have this point system for balancing the game. Start there. But yeah, 490 seems good. It's got like that's the one with the big fuck off gun, right? Like it just has the big, effectively rail gun, which I think almost every army has access to if it came out after Tau. I mean, that might not be accurate, but it sure feels like it. Like Votan have theirs, Tau have theirs, Eldar have access to one. It's a stratagem, but they still get it. The Votan one is infuriating to me. Ignores invulnerable saves, yeah. Feel like that was the interaction it had. Or does that one not ignore invulnerable saves? Okay. Yep. like that GW basically has decided that they've given away too many invulnerable saves. So to counter that, they've just started making guns that ignore invulnerable saves. Like, bro, you could just make the invulnerable saves cost more. Like all these units that can take them as upgrades, you could just make them cost more so that people are getting less of them. Like, yeah, I'm sure they'll have something that does it. Like, it might just be a strat, but I'm sure there will be something in there. Because, like I said, I can't think of, especially not any shooting focused army that's come out since Tau that hasn't had it. Maybe the Chaos Knights don't. I don't know. I don't interact with Knights enough to know what they do and don't have. That's not an army I particularly care for as a player. Because both Chaos and Loyalist Knights both are those armies where they just have those secondaries where it's like I'm gonna just get, you know, 12 to 15 points in this secondary simply because I put models on the table. So it's hard to gauge like player skill and army strength based off of those interactions. Yeah, and I agree. It's super weird. The volcano cannon doesn't, but I guess part of that, like with the knights specifically, is that like for whatever reason they decided to just let things ship mortal wounds in that book. And again, that's one of my least favorite interactions in this game, and I'd like to see those go down. I don't like that the second half of this edition has like teetered towards Age of Sigmar levels of mortal wounds. Like armies should not be putting out 40 to 50 in this game. Like that is not what 40k should be about. But it's where we're at right now. And coincidentally, the top armies right now competitively are either the ones that can or the ones that can just score points without interacting with your opponent, like we just said. Hell yeah, dude. So, I've been able to, because of the community being so helpful, I've been able to get, my orcs pretty playable. I was able to replace my brother's sister's army pretty cheap. And able to just kind of like the Drukhari and Eldar that I got. Most of that was also secondhand and also like employee discount. So I'm just like been thinking about what the next build's gonna be for me. And it's one of those where I recognize that I am going to need at some point a Marine army because those get the best views on the streams. Those get the best views on YouTube. So I'm gonna just have to bite the bullet and do it, even though I'm not a fan. But I can do that quickly and really cheaply. Like that one's not crazy. Yeah, and again, it's just the mortal wounds, you know. It's the zoanthropes specifically. Like when a unit is so good that no matter what your build is, you have to include that unit in your build. Like you have to reevaluate the points cost of that unit and maybe the way you wrote the rules for it. You know, when they basically limited their access of invulnerable save to that one specific unit, and then also just made that one specific unit such a devastating damage dealing unit, it pretty much sealed it that that was going to be, hey, you can't play this army competitively without this. And not that you can't, you won't see a competitive. The Harpies are weird because, so like the Harpies, if you've got shooting and you go first, you can evaporate Harpies. You know, they are good and they are effectively an auto include in most people's lists. But like when I played Bo, I lost because I screwed up. I didn't lose because he beat me, and I didn't lose because he was playing Nids. I lost because I screwed up. Um, and it was only like an 8 or a 10 point game. But I got to go first, and he picked up one of those Harpies instantly. I was just like, look, dude, I'm not fucking with these. I had 2 Fire Prisms in my list, and it was just like, you're going to pick one of those up turn 1, you're going to pick the other one up turn 2, and I'm not playing with him. And he did. You know, he absolutely did. So the Harpies to me are like any other aircraft. Like that's a 50-50 gamble a lot of games simply because they can either be killed or crippled very easily. Um, the Winged Hive Tyrant, I think, is something that probably needs a points hike because that is an auto include in every list. And the ability to just move it 16 charge, fight, and then move it 16 inches again. Like, that's kind of a silly interaction. So either that thing needs to go up in points or maybe just lose access to the overrun stratagem is kind of where I see that. Because it's I can camp it next to these Tyrant Guard, I can fly it up here, I can advance it, I can cast Onslaught to charge it, and then I can charge you, I can fight you, and then when I consolidate, I can just fly away. So, you know, like I said, like that's kind of a weird interaction in that book, and yeah, yeah, agreed. Um, and like I said, um, I'd rather deal with that though than the zoanthropes. The I can super smite on like a 5 or a 6 or whatever it is. Like it's absurdly low. Like this whole I can super smite on like a 6, and then I just do like D6 plus 4 mortal wounds or whatever it ends up coming out to be. Like that is just not a good interaction. And it needs to kind of go away, right? Like those things either need to go up in points or something needs to be done to those. Not because they're just too powerful. You can work around them, but any unit that can spew out that many mortal wounds. Yeah, Flyrance is one of the main reasons for the rule of 3. That is true. That is true. And a lot of that Flyrant spam that started in, I think it was 7th edition when that came out, maybe it was early 8th, happened because of the way Eldar were interacting with the game, if I remember right. But no, I'd like to see some changes there. You know, I'd like to see more units in the Tyranid Codex get used rather than just like Here's my brick of warriors. Here's my brick of zoanthropes, or my 2 brick of zoanthropes. But yeah, and that's it. Is I'd like to see them kind of get toned down to some degree. Like, we took core away from broadsides, but we're letting this unit basically do a D6 plus 5 or 4 mortal wounds effectively every psychic phase that it can see something. I feel like this is not a good or healthy interaction with this game, you know. And like I said, like the fact that they're only invulnerable saves for the most part are tied to that unit, and then that unit also just does buckets of damage. Feels like kind of a dumb mistake. Like, we're gonna make this unit so fucking good, you'll never see a list without at least 3 of them. But no, that game against Bo, I ended up losing because I fought out of sequence with my Incarn. I had to fight with her first, or last, I should say. Hey, what's up, man? I fought with her. I needed to fight with her first, and then fight elsewhere, but I ended up fighting with her last. So I wasn't able to teleport her, and I knew in my head, like, this is what I needed to do, and I didn't do it. And man, as soon as I fought with her, I just looked at Bo and was like, well, sir, I think I just made a mistake that cost me the game. And he was like, oh, and at that point it didn't matter. He was going to figure it out. And when I told him, he was just like, oh no. And yeah, like I think that was the moment where, like, because he was able to just do like 20 mortal wounds to her in the psychic phase, and because of that, she died, and he didn't have to really dump too much into her. Whereas if I'd have remembered to teleport her, I could have at least forced him to get out of position and you know interact with the game a little bit differently. I don't know that I win. I just know that it doesn't guarantee that I lose. If any of that made sense. I'm not a good multitasker, and I was trying to change something on my computer real quick. Crushing more of this Nachmund Terrain today. Man, Frank, you missed a big talk about Marines this morning. It was a good one. My buddy Jimmy was in here, whom I think you met last time you were on stream with me. And we were just kind of talking about the state of Marines. Dan here is also a guard player. You guys are like, you're spreading. Oh, that's nothing I need to care about. I really should just close that. No, Blood Ravens, dude. You gotta play Blood Ravens. Okay, I need to look at that later. Sounds good, Dan. It was good seeing you, buddy. Glad to have you on, as always. We're gonna go for basically go until I finish this box. And then I think that only leaves me like 3 boxes left, which is cool. And then I might actually eat breakfast. I haven't eaten yet. But So I don't remember how much we kind of touched on last time we talked about this, Frank, but I think I've come to the decision that I have to build a Marine army. I don't necessarily want to, but I'm gonna have to. And a lot of that stems from just like being a content creator and seeing where my views are coming from. And when I do battle reports and I stream live games, if it's anything that has a Marine chapter in it, gets literally double the views of anything that doesn't. You know, it does not matter what it is. You know, we've had Space Wolves. So I think I'm going to do White Scars, and that has nothing to do with their lore and more to do with it. They just play the game the way I want to play. I love the fight phase. You know, I do play orcs. When I play any kind of elf, I play melee elves. Uh, so White Scars, and I think White Scars actually have a lot of potential for competitive play. Even I was looking at a lot of their stuff, and there's some good interactions. Their secondary is actually pretty solid because they added a secondary for the White Scars in Nephilim, uh, and it's pretty solid. You score 1 point for killing an enemy unit in the fight phase, but you score 3 points if it's a vehicle, character, or monster. I believe is the interaction. It might just be character or monster. But if you're going to take Assassinate, you're going to take that one instead, because you're getting 3 points for killing the characters anyway, but then you're getting additional points for killing an eighth. Yeah, so interestingly, I think the core, like the fundamental unit that I'm going to build my army around is actually neither of those things. My plan is to build it around aggressors, believe it or not. um, yeah, aggressors getting advance and charge, and they just have assault weapons anyway. And if you put them in the assault doctrine, because you can use that stratagem to put them into whatever doctrine you want to, their power fists become 3 damage. So, you know, on the charge, obviously. But there's a lot of potential for good damage output there. Right. And then couple that with the T5, 3 wounds, 3 up save, armor of contempt. So like they're pretty chunky. And I think I'll run 2 units of 5 of those and just kind of probably throw an apothecary with them as well. And I may keep the con next to them just as like this kind of big brick that's going to move towards the center of the board. Obviously, they don't need to move towards the center if there's no objective, but because the con gives you +1 to wound on the charge also, so you can actually like into these big T9 vehicles, you can actually wound them on 4s with your power fists, and it'll be neg 4, but neg 3 because of armor of contempt if you're hitting like a land raider. But they're 3 damage each, so you're gonna push these big vehicles to a 5-up for 3 damage each with a lot of dice. So it's a lot of damage potential. And then, like I said, like just taking the flamers just to keep them cheap, but getting 2d6 auto hits that you can throw every turn, whether you advance or not. So they'll get advance, shoot, and charge because they're assault weapons. Um, and then I think I need a unit of suppressors just so I can make sure I can shut off overwatches. Obviously, they only affect infantry units, but it's not a stratagem like it is for the whirlwind, so it's not eating my resources that I would need to invest elsewhere. And the apothecary would be upgraded. Um, I'm on the fence on Vanguard veterans because when I decided this, I was thinking I would probably play predominantly Primaris stuff, and that has less to do with anything other than like as far as Marines go, I prefer the Primaris aesthetic. Like they have a much cooler look to me, and also B, um, I don't know what the state of firstborns are going to be. You know, I don't know if they're going to be hanging around, if they're going to go away, if they're just going to get separated into their own codex. You know, at some point, something is going to happen with the Firstborns and the Primaris. I just don't know what, and I don't know when. So that was the intent, was to run as much Primaris as I can. And I might take an Impulsor. Right, right. The Flamers, like, if you do tap into, like, somebody who's running a lot of bodies, because there are still a few units, like into Nids, I feel like the Flamers are going to do really well, because Nids don't have great armor saves outside of their monsters. You know, and you even Warriors, like, yeah, you're wounding Warriors on 5s, but they just have a 4-up save. Yeah, yeah. Well, and aggressors are weird because there's like a couple of chapters where I feel like they're really good, and then most of the other chapters are just like not great. And I think they're like a sleeper unit for White Scars. And then, you know, they've got the Gravis strat, so you've got Armor of Contempt, and then you can effectively give them All Is Dust. I forget what the strat's called. What's their secondary? I haven't looked at theirs. Oh, I can just pull it up real quick, actually. Do I have my phone? I don't know what I did with it. Oh, that's hilarious. That's actually super funny. I can, let's go to, let me just pull it up here. I've got 2 screens. We can do that. Secondary objectives. Actually, that works because I can pull up all the Marine ones. Yeah, so White Scars is 3 points for a character and monster, not vehicle, and melee. And then 1 point for each other unit. And then you get 1 point for killing a unit in shooting also if you advanced. So, like, seems like an auto take. This must be the Salamanders one. At the end of your command phase, if you control that objective marker, you get 2 points. And then you... What the heck? That's hilarious. Right? Exactly. Being able to advance Eradicators, hopefully delete a unit because they don't suffer the penalty for advancing and shooting, and then score a point for killing it. Each time an enemy unit is selected to shoot or fight, if it selects a Salamander's infantry unit from your army that is within range of this objective marker, and is the target of one or more of its attacks, but it does not destroy the unit as a result of those attacks, you score 1 victory point. That is hilarious. At the end of each player's turn, if one or more enemy units were destroyed by attacks made by the unit on this objective, you score 1 victory point. You score 2 instead if one or more models in any of those units. Yeah, no, that seems like an auto take. Like, you just pick. Is it pick? Oh, in your first command phase, yeah, you select one objective marker that's not. That's bonkers good. Yeah. Because at that point, again, like, you're just gonna plan to throw something big and chunky in there. Um, like aggressors, for example. Like, if you can get 2 bricks of aggressors on that objective with an apothecary to kind of bring them back, or maybe not even aggressors, just because you might want something a little shootier. Gosh, Because, like, you could arguably, well, you'd want a flame or melt a unit. That's the downside if you wanted to really capitalize on that. But yeah, because you get 2 every turn just for controlling it. So they're gonna have to try to interact with you, or you're just getting points. Like you could get those right eradicators in cover. Well, and so interestingly, like, man, I would almost consider eradicators, throwing them in, what is it, the impulsor that they can go in? I don't know if they can or not because they're Gravis, and I don't remember if Gravis can go in an impulsor. I don't think they can. I'm still learning some of the marine interactions. Yeah, I was gonna look it up on the app, but I don't know what I did with my phone. So I'm just gonna Google that real quick. Let's look at the impulsor data sheet. Impulsor, because I know it's a transport, and maybe it can't take. No, it can't do Gravis. Okay, which makes sense. Because one of the things I'm thinking about doing for that White Scars is taking an impulsor and just putting a brick of Hellblasters with the assault weapons in it. Maybe do a 5-man and then put my captain in there. I don't know. I might not put a captain in there. You know, sometimes it's best to just like let Jesus take the wheel and hope you don't pick up your models to supercharging plasma because it's funny. But putting Hell Blasters in there because they can get out after the transport moves, and the transport moves 14 inches, and they move 6, and they can advance once they disembark, so they'll actually move a minimum of 7. And then if you account for the wholly within 3 inches, you can effectively get yourself an extra 3 inches of movement with that first model. So we're at 17, 23, 24 inch minimum. Right? That's it, man. You're not wrong. Inceptors are some of my favorite models and units in that stupid codex. I love Inceptors. But I would give them the Assault Hellblaster simply because it's pretty solid, obviously. You know, like it's strength 6, it's neg 4? Or is that one 3? That one might be 3. Let's look. Hellblaster. Oh, they're all neg 4. That's gross. You can supercharge them to strength 7. And there's a chaplain litany that, like, you can pick a unit, and their shooting, I believe, is +1 to wound. So you can have supercharged strength 7 +1 to wound, neg 4, 2 damage weapons, which is it's pretty spicy. And obviously, you won't necessarily need the +1 to wound into some things, or to supercharge into some things. Like, there's no point in supercharging it into any kind of like Death Guard or Duty Eternal model, because you're just literally wasting dice and damage at that point. But it's one of those where it's like, man, those things get 3 shots each. So, you know, you can get 15 neg 4, 1 to 2 damage dice, and give them +1 to wound with a chaplain. And because there's that stratagem where if you haven't done a litany, you can make one automatically go off for 2 command points. Seems worth, because the way I'm probably going to be building this list is, I mean, like, I'm going to run the named Khan because he's got the +1 to wound in the command phase buff. And then he's got, you know, so you don't need to give him a relic or a warlord trait. Like, I don't need that. I'll bring the apothecary with the warlord trait so he can bring a dude back for free. And then I think that honestly, like, that might be the only thing I take as far as relics and warlord traits go. I'd have to look, just because At that point, I'm starting with 5 command points. Maybe take a Contemptor so I can get 6. Or 4, I mean, you know, if I take the Relic. But it's like, at that point, I've got the command points that I don't have to sweat blowing through them too quickly. Because, man, Marine Stratagems, some of those things are super good. Like, the ability to shoot in action, you know? So it's like, I can get out, get them within range of something. Like, that thing can move 14. I can move within range. I don't know if the shoot in action is in the command phase, though. I'd have to look on that one. Because that one might be you do it in the command phase. But, yeah, no, there's... I was really looking at it. Yeah, hell yeah, dude. There's a lot of potential there. I think it's just like you got to think outside the box, you know. But sounds good. I'm actually going to be wrapping up here soon. I'm almost done with this box anyway. So have a good one, Frank. Cool, cool, cool. And actually, I think that's where we'll stop. I've just got one sprue left. I can knock that out later. So everybody, thanks for coming. We've been on for 2 hours, so later.